The U.S. economy seems pretty strong right now, right? You see low unemployment numbers, inflation seems under control, it all sounds pretty good. And here's the thing, under the surface, there's this widening gap between the really wealthy and, well, everyone else. And what's interesting is the wealthy are actually the ones kind of driving this economic growth by spending so much. Meanwhile, a lot of others are having a hard time keeping up. If you look at the numbers, those earning over $153,000 a year are the ones fueling a good chunk of the growth because of all their spending. And those making $73,000 or less, well, they're having more and more trouble making ends meet. There wasn't always the case. Before the pandemic, spending growth was pretty much the same across different income levels. But then things changed, and now we're seeing this big difference. So why are the wealthy pulling ahead? Well, one reason is they've really benefited from things like the stock market and real estate going up in value. And for some, even the cryptocurrency boom played a part. But a lot of households, those with lower and middle incomes, they just haven't seen those same gains from investments. And even though wages have mostly kept up with inflation for many, it's still not enough. They're having to rely on credit cards just to keep up with their spending. And this is where things get tricky, because credit card interest rates are really high, around 20%. So it's incredibly tough to get out of that debt cycle. People end up having to make tough choices, and you can see it in the data. The amount of consumer debt that's delinquent, it's at a near 5-year high. That means more people are falling behind on their payments, more than we've seen in years. And when you look at credit cards, it gets even more concerning. Over 11% of credit card accounts are at least 90 days past due. That's actually higher than any point during the pandemic. We haven't seen a level like that since 2011. And new delinquencies on credit cards, those are going up too, reaching levels we haven't seen in over 10 years. Another thing, more people are only paying the minimum on their credit cards. That number's at a 12-year high. Even people making over $100,000 a year, people who are usually considered pretty well off, even they're feeling the pressure these days. They're shopping more at places like Walmart, trying to make their money go further. And you can actually see this gap widening when you look at credit scores. Data from FICO shows that, yeah, we have a record number of people with really great credit scores, like 750 or higher. But at the same time, more people are slipping into that subprime category with scores below 600. And that's where it gets really tough for people called non-prime borrowers. They're the ones with those lower scores, so they have to pay way higher interest rates on loans and credit cards. And unfortunately, more of them are defaulting on their debts. Their overall debt is growing faster than everyone else, even faster than before the pandemic. Now, before we all get too gloomy, I do want to mention that not everyone is freaking out. Some experts are, well, cautiously optimistic. They point out that things have slowed down a little. The rate of those delinquencies isn't rising as fast as it was. And they think people are starting to be more careful with their money, managing their credit card balances better, thinking more about how much they spend compared to how much they make. But even with that little bit of good news, it's hard to ignore the bigger picture. Things aren't looking great when it comes to credit card performance. People aren't just spending more and running up their balances, they're also paying off less each month. So that means what they call revolving balances are going up. Basically, they're carrying a balance on their card month after month, and that just leads to paying a ton more in interest. So what does this all mean for the average person? I mean, it's painting a pretty clear picture, isn't it? The economy seems to be driven by the spending of a pretty small group of wealthy people. But a lot of people are weighed down by debt, struggling with tough financial decisions every day. And it makes you wonder, can this really keep going? Can the economy really keep going like this? Depending so much on a small group of rich people spending all this money. What happens if they suddenly decide to stop spending as much? And then you have a cost of living going up and maybe interest rates going up too. What's that going to do to everyone, the wealthy and those who are already struggling? These are really big, complicated questions, and there's no easy answer. But we have to think about them, right? If we want to really understand what's happening with the U.S. economy, and, maybe we should each think about our own part in this whole thing too. Or maybe we're trying to keep up with the Joneses a bit too much, spending more than we should, using those credit cards to live a lifestyle we can't really afford. Maybe it's time to just take a step back and think about what we expect. Are we wanting too much too quickly without really thinking about what might happen later on? It's not always easy to ask ourselves these questions, but if we want to figure out this whole money thing, make good choices for ourselves, well, we've got to.